When I heard my mom screaming, I assumed that our neighbor's cat was chewing up Mom's precious garden again. However, when I left my room, I didn't understand anything I was witnessing. My mom was on the verge of collapsing, and I could barely keep it together. At first, I thought that I was seeing a ghost, but what I saw turned out to be very real. Standing on our porch was my sister, who had been missing for the last 5 years. Lily was 2 back then. She went out with my dad, but he returned without her, saying that she had been kidnapped. He left her alone in the car for just a couple of minutes while he went to buy her some candy, but when he returned, she wasn't there. And today, here she is, standing right in front of us. She simply disappeared, and after a year of searching without finding any leads, her file was closed. Some people said that she must have died, whereas others thought that what happened to her may have been a lot worse. My mom blamed my dad for her disappearance and could no longer stand living with him. So they separated. During that time, my dad couldn't care less. He married another woman, and they moved into a big, lavish house. We didn't even know that he had enough money to buy something so luxurious. After this, my mom really started going downhill. Her sadness over my sister never left her. A lot of times, she'd even call me by my sister's name. It was such a horrible time, and I was being torn apart seeing my mom like this. Lately, my mom had been acting even more strangely. She started following the news every day. She even took out my sister's photos from the old albums and hung them up around the house, in the living room, the kitchen, her bedroom, and even mine. She kept on telling me that she felt that my sister was going to return, and that one day the news was going to mention my sister's return. My mom was on the verge of going crazy. She no longer went to work, and she didn't allow me to leave the house, not even to go to school. She ignored all the calls she received and locked all the windows and doors, all because she heard a story on the news about a gang that had been arrested for kidnapping kids for ransom. But I wasn't even a child anymore, and it's not like we owned anything that might tempt the gang. Hope returned to her once again after she read some stories about families that were reunited with their children after they'd been missing for a year. But come on, my sister had been missing for 5 years. We had to accept the reality of it all and move on. But it didn't stop there. My mom's fear of me being kidnapped was killing me. I was no longer allowed to go outside because she feared that the same fate would happen to me. I totally understood where she was coming from, but I couldn't take it any longer. I wanted to live my life like other kids my age. Was I asking for too much? Once, my friend Leah threw a party and she invited all of our friends. I wanted to go to this party more than anything else in the world. I begged my mom over and over to allow me to go, but she refused. So for the first time ever, I snuck out. I told my mom that I was going to sleep, and then I put pillows on the bed. I covered them with my duvet so it would look like I was lying under there. This way my mom would think that I was fast asleep. I was sure that my plan would work out the way I wanted. At the party, I felt anxious at first, but then I quickly relaxed. After exactly an hour, my mom was standing right in front of me. I couldn't believe this woman. She wouldn't even give me space to breathe. She made me leave the party with her. Everyone was looking at us and whispering. I even heard one call my mom a lunatic. All the way home, she kept yelling at me and lecturing me, but I couldn't handle it anymore. I yelled in her face, "Enough! Can't you see that you're keeping me locked up like a prisoner? This is not the life I want for myself. If you want me to stay with you, allow me to live, or else you won't see my face ever again." She didn't reply. She just slammed the door and locked it up as usual, imprisoning me. The following day, I started hearing rumors spreading about me and my mom. The worst one was that I'd run away with a guy who was 30 years older than me because my mom didn't allow me to date him, and that the police returned me home and locked him up because I was still underage. And since then, my mom hadn't allowed me to go anywhere. I mean, can you believe that? It is all Lily's fault. If she didn't disappear that day, my life wouldn't have turned into such a nightmare. You might think it couldn't get any worse, but you'd be wrong. I had nowhere I could run to. I only had my mom, who'd turned crazy, and my dad, who was living with his wife. Me and my dad, well, we didn't exactly have a good relationship. I never saw him except for at Christmas. He usually got me a gift, and we had hot chocolate in some cafe. Then he disappeared until the next Christmas rolled around. I thought maybe if I went to my dad and convinced him to let me stay with him instead of in the prison with my mom, my life would get better. You might think that sounds selfish and ungrateful, but hear me out. I seriously needed his help. I mean, my mom wasn't a normal person anymore. I decided she needed actual medical help. She was losing it. The next day, I snuck out of the window. The window was quite high up, and I never really thought it through. I hurt my leg when I jumped, but at least I was still able to walk. It was pitch black outside. My dad's house was only 3 blocks away, so I decided to walk there, even though I was scared. It was the first time that I'd ever walked alone at night. I kept imagining a car stopping and kidnapping me. Okay, I know what you're thinking now. All those ideas had been put there by my mom, and well, look what she'd done. It had worked. I was officially terrified. Though when I arrived, I wish I hadn't even come. I wasn't welcomed at all. My stepmom kept me on the porch and didn't even let me into the house. I sat shivering in the cold for more than an hour, waiting for my dad to arrive. When he finally did, I thought that he'd at least ask me why I'd come here. But what he did made me hate his guts. He started shouting in my face, telling me he didn't need any more problems and that he didn't want the police entering his house thinking he was a suspect. A suspect? But why? I'm his daughter. It wasn't like he'd kidnapped me or anything. But when he tried to take me home, the police surrounded his house, handcuffed him, and took him away. That night was one of the longest nights of my life. I spent hours in the police station answering a lot of weird questions about my dad. What am I doing with my dad at such a late hour out of the house? Did my mother know that I'm with my dad, or did he ask me not to tell her? Why was my dad dragging me into his car? Where does he want to take me? But the weirdest thing was that the policemen began to ask me questions about my lost sister. I mean, how was that even connected to me running away from home? I never imagined that it was possible to actually miss being at home with my mom. In the morning, my mom came to take me home, but she refused to tell me what was going on. She hugged me tightly and said, "I am happy I didn't lose you, too." I didn't know back then what had happened with my dad. I thought that it was my mom who'd called the cops and reported me missing, and that the police arrested my dad for being their first suspect. For once, I was grateful for my mom's overprotectiveness and crazy behavior, especially when she got worried about me. My dad got what he deserved for treating me so badly. But through tears, my mom told me that she hadn't reported anything. She didn't even know I was gone until the police called her. Suddenly, everything felt strange. My mom allowed me to go back to school, but this time I was the one who wanted to stay home. In that moment, I finally understood my mom and realized that I had no one else in the entire world. More than a week went by, and I still didn't know anything about my dad, and I didn't even care until I heard my mom yelling. I went outside to see Lily standing on the porch with 2 police officers and a couple I'd never seen before. It was my sister. I was sure it was. She had exactly the same facial expressions, but she looked older. The photos hung all around the house were hers. She even looked like me. Had my sister really returned after all these years? But how? And why? And who were the couple next to her? My mom couldn't contain herself when she saw my sister. She literally passed out. We moved her to the bed and called the doctor, who in return gave her some sedatives. During this time, the police stayed, sitting with the man and woman, and of course my sister. I asked them to explain what was going on, and they did. One of the policemen told me that a while ago they'd arrested some members of a gang who'd kidnapped children and sold them to people who couldn't give birth. And my dad had been a member of that gang. That's right. Because of his greed, my dad not only hurt a lot of families, he also sold his own daughter, his own flesh and blood for money. What kind of a father would do that? How could someone be so heartless? As for the couple that accompanied the police, they were close friends of the family who bought Lily from my dad. No one knew that she wasn't their daughter. Everyone had been deceived. However, the family that had bought Lily had died in a car accident, and after interrogating my dad, the police were able to find all the other children who had been kidnapped by my dad. The family insisted to be with my sister when she returned home so they can apologize to my mother about all the pain they had caused her. I'm not sure whether my mom will ever accept their apology, but I knew she was glad her daughter had finally returned home. This story sounds like the plot of some insane movie, right? But unfortunately, it is true. After my mom calmed down and collected herself, she didn't even care to hear the whole story. All she wanted was to hug my sister again. It is hard for my sister to understand everything that happened. She is barely 7 years old, but at least she is safe with her real family now. What do you think of my story? Crazy, right?
The sound of sirens pierced through the night air. I knew I didn't have much time. I reached my hand through the broken glass window and grabbed hold of the gold bracelet. I had never done anything like that before, but I was desperate. Suddenly, I heard a car screech up behind me. "Put your hands in the air," shouted a male voice. I turned around to see who had spoken. 2 police officers were standing in front of me, their guns pointing straight towards me. I had a split second to decide what to do. I could either run for it or give myself up. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more shocking stories. I was just about to make a run for it when the female officer said, "Joel, is that you?" "Mom?" I replied. "Dad?" I couldn't believe it. My parents were going to arrest me. But then they did something I never expected. The 2 officers lowered their guns. "Just go home, Joel," said the male officer. "We will sort this out." "I'm sorry, Dad," I said. "I have to do this for Tess." I put the bracelet in my pocket and went straight home. You're probably wondering what all that was about. Well, if you want to find out more, be sure to stay tuned until the end of the video. I knew Tess was out of my league, but it didn't stop me from falling in love with her. From the first time I set eyes on her, I knew she was the one for me. I would do anything to get her to date me. It was halfway through the school year when Tess came to our school. She was like a breath of fresh air. I remember her walking into the school hall and everyone stopped what they were doing and just stared at her. I had never seen anyone so beautiful in all my life. It took me about a week to pluck up the courage to talk to her. She was sitting in the school canteen by herself. I got my lunch and went over to her table. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. "Sure," she said, smiling. My heart skipped a beat, and it felt like 1,000 butterflies were dancing through my stomach. "I'm Joel," I said. "Tess," she replied. We chatted through the whole lunch break. Tess told me how she was an only child. She had recently moved to our town because her dad had got a new job here. "I miss my friends," she said. I noticed the gold locket hanging around her neck. "That's a pretty necklace. Did you get that from your friends?" "Oh, this? No, this was a present from my ex-boyfriend. He was always showering me with gifts." My heart sank. There was no way I could compete with that. She was obviously used to getting expensive presents from her boyfriends. I didn't have the money to be able to buy her things. As I walked home from school that afternoon, I thought about how unfair life was. Some kids had everything they wanted, whilst people like me had nothing. It wasn't as though my parents didn't have the money. They both had really good jobs. But they wanted me to get things through my own hard work, not have everything handed to me on a plate. My dad's favorite thing to say to me was, "Money doesn't grow on trees. If you want to make something of your life, then you have to work hard for it." My mom and dad were both police officers. That's how they had met each other. They had both joined the police cadets when they were 17 years old and had been together ever since. I wanted that for me and Tess, too. I had to find a way to get her expensive gifts so that she would want to date me. So that's why I broke into the jewelry store. I had seen the gold bracelet that afternoon as I walked past the shop window. The glare from the afternoon sunshine reflected off it, and it blinded me for a second. I knew that Tess would love it. I couldn't believe that my parents had caught me stealing it. I had waited up for them to come home. When they came through the door, my dad didn't say anything. He just looked disappointed in me. "Don't worry, we have sorted it all out," said Mom. "Your fingerprints have all been cleaned up. No one will know it was you that broke in." "Thanks, Mom," I said. "It won't happen again." They asked me why I had tried to break in and steal, and when I told them it was for a girl, they looked even more disappointed. I apologized, and thankfully they didn't ground me for that long. The next morning, I set off early for school. I wanted to be at the school gates before Tess arrived. When I saw her walking down the street towards me, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold bracelet. "Hi, Tess, I've got you a present," I said. Tess looked at the bracelet and beamed. "Thank you, Joel, it's beautiful." She took the bracelet and put it on her wrist. "I love it," she said. "It must have cost you a fortune." I shrugged my shoulders. Nothing is too expensive for the prettiest girl in the school. Tess looked at me and blushed. Are you doing anything on Saturday?" I stammered. "No." "Do you want to go to the movies or something?" Tess laughed. Are you asking me out on a date, Joel? Yes, I am, I said nervously. I'd love to. I couldn't believe it. Tess had agreed to go out with me. Tess and I went on our first date that weekend. It wasn't long before we were spending every minute of our free time together. We got on so well. We were definitely soulmates. I couldn't risk losing her, so I began to steal things from other shops as well. I know I had told my parents that it wouldn't happen again, but I just wanted to make Tess happy. It started off with small things, but eventually I was stealing Gucci handbags for her and designer clothes. It was easy not to get caught. Over the years, I had often heard my parents talking about where stores had their security cameras and alarm systems. I got to the stage where I was stealing something almost every other day. I began to get a bit cocky about it, taking more and more risks. One time I was in town shopping with my mom and I saw a pair of expensive trainers that I knew Tess would love. When the assistant wasn't looking, I took them and shoved them into my bag. I held my breath as we walked out of the shop, hoping that the alarm wouldn't go off. It was silent. As we walked down the street, I smiled to myself. I had just got away with it. But then Mom stopped walking. She turned to me and said, "Joel, I know you took the trainers." I looked at her in shock. "I'm sorry, I won't do it again," I said. "Please, promise me that is the last time you will steal anything." "I promise." I meant what I said. It was time to turn over a new leaf. I decided that from then on, I wouldn't steal anymore. Tess and I were good now. I didn't need to give her any more presents. Everything was perfect until one day I was sitting in my bedroom when I heard my mom calling up to me. "Joel, Tess is here." I went downstairs. "Hi, Tess," I said in surprise. "I thought we were supposed to meet up later." "Can we talk, Joel?" she said. We went outside and sat in the garden. "Joel, where have you been getting all the stuff that you keep giving me?" she asked. I was caught off guard for a second. I had never expected her to ask me. "It's just things I've bought for you." But Tess wouldn't let it go. She kept on and on at me. "I know you don't have the money to buy such expensive things," she said. Finally, I admitted it. I told her that I'd been stealing from stores to get her the things she liked. I thought that she would never want to see me again, now that she knew the truth. But she surprised me. "Oh, that's so sweet of you," she said. "I can't believe you would do something like that for me." I gave a sigh of relief. Everything was going to be fine. "Joel," she said, "do you think you could get something really special for me?" "What?" "There is this big crown that I've had my eyes on." She opened her phone and showed me a picture of the crown. I looked at her in astonishment. Was she crazy? "That's one of the crown jewels," I said. "It belongs to the Queen of England." Tess just smiled at me. "Come on, if you do this, then we can become official. This will be the last heist you have to do." I thought about what she had said. I knew that I shouldn't do it, but I really wanted her to be my girlfriend. Even though I had promised my mom that I wouldn't steal again. If I did this last one job, we would be official and all my dreams would come true. "Okay," I said, "I'll do it." Over the next few weeks, I began to make my plan. I knew it wouldn't be an easy job, but I had access to my parents' computer so I could tap into the security system for the vault where the crown was kept. I spent hours studying the layout of the building. Eventually, I was ready. I waited until it got dark and crept out of the house. I sat outside the building and waited. I knew that at 10 p.m. the guards would change over. That's when I would make my move. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard the footsteps of the new guard walking towards the building. As the two guards spoke to each other, I darted into the open door of the building. Nobody had seen me. I crept along the hallway towards the room, keeping the crown. My heart was beating so loudly, I felt sure that the guard would hear it. I took out my phone and tapped into the building's security system. I disabled the alarm and cameras. I opened the door to the room, praying that the alarm wouldn't ring. It didn't. There, in front of me, was the crown. The diamonds and rubies on it glistened in the moonlight. I picked up the crown and was just about to put it into my backpack when the door burst open. "Put your hands in the air," someone shouted from behind me. I couldn't believe it. Had my parents caught me again? I turned around to see who was behind me, but it wasn't my parents standing there. It was Tess. "Tess?" I whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to arrest you," she said. "What are you talking about?" She laughed. "You have no idea, do you? I'm an undercover cop." I couldn't believe what she was saying. "I finally caught you." "But I'm in love with you. I thought we had something really special." Tess was just about to say something when I heard someone coming into the room. It was my parents. "Mom, Dad, please help me. She's an undercover cop. She's going to arrest me," I shouted. "Run for your life, Joel. We'll take care of her," said Dad. I ran out of the building as fast as I could. I had no idea how my parents had known where I was, but I sure was pleased to see them. I sat and waited all night, but my parents didn't come home. I tried calling their phones, but they just went straight to voicemail. I had no idea what they would do with Tess. The next morning, I got a message from my mom. "Everything has been taken care of," she wrote. "We are at the abandoned warehouse on the industrial estate." I got dressed and went straight to the warehouse. When I got there, I saw Tess was sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. She had been blindfolded and was tied to the chair. My mom and dad were both standing in front of her. "What are you going to do with her?" I asked. "We will keep her here until we can decide what to do with her," said Dad. "How did you know where I was?" Mom and Dad told me that they had been following my every move ever since the first time I had stolen something. "We know that you've been stealing all this time," said Mom. "When we saw that you had been using our computer to look at the vault, we knew that you were planning something," said Dad. "I'm so sorry. I promise I will never do anything like this." But before I could finish my sentence, my dad put his hand over my mouth. "There's someone outside," he whispered in my ear. "Go out the back door and make a run for it." As I went out the door, I heard the front door come crashing down. "Police, don't move!" I ran to the front of the building and hid behind a big bush. There were 4 or 5 police cars parked outside the building, their lights flashing. I watched as they brought my parents out in handcuffs. They put them into the cars and drove away. I knew that my parents would be going to jail for a very long time for kidnapping Tess. I'm on the run now. My life is in shambles. What should I do? Should I hand myself in to the police, or should I continue to live my life on the run?